Hello everyone, my name is Yogesh and in today's lecture we will understand OOPS and classes. Basically today's lecture is totally dedicated to beginners because most of the time I have seen beginners do face difficulty in understanding class and how they work, and the reason for that is because they are from C language background, they haven't worked over C++, so it is new to them. So you don't have to worry about if you don't know the OOPS like C++, then from this lecture you can understand how class works and what is classes. So now starting with the definition of OOPS. Okay, one thing I want to make clear is in today's lecture I'll be using very less theory to explain things and the more part will be practical, so that I should not be confusing you. So now OOPS stand for object oriented programming. Now in OOPS we can define it as a real world representation of real world object in shape of classes. Now this definition you must have read before also, but I will make you sense. So let us read one more thing. Like in real world object features in the real world object features in OOPS are defined as properties or attribute or fields. Now let me make more sense to you by this example. Now suppose we have we have to construct a class which should represent a human. Now one thing if we have to notice about human is human has few features, like he has name, he has age, he has address, he has height and width. So what we can say is like these other things like name, age, address, height and width are properties of human. So how we can define it in the class? So in the class form what we made is we made a class which is public. Access specifier I will be telling you in detail later. So now like we have created a class named human, and as I told you the properties which human have we will be defining them within the class. So now here the class is human, name defines like determines the name property of that human, age is for that human age, address same belongs to the human, and height and width also. Now the data types are given as per the requirement, because name cannot be a number, age cannot be a name, or like you can say text, and address cannot be a like you can say number, because it must be having some street address and so we have taken like height and width can be in floating, like basically some 11.2 inches or something like that. So this is what class is. Now in this we just directly represented human as a class. So let's see the practical part of it. Now let me move to the next slide first. Okay, let us come to this part. Now the class which I showed you here, just ignore the other classes, we will come to them later. Now the class which I showed you, what I made is I made a class named human, and the same thing which I made is like I have defined these properties and the data type as a public. So just for now just keep it as a public so that you can understand like what is public, like will be able to perform practical. Later we will come over the access specifier. Now the name, age, address, weight and height are the properties of human. So now what we are doing is we will make an object of a human class. Now object of a human class represent one single human. So what we did is we will make a human, like we will ask to declare one object named obj human, and this is the syntax of like making an object. We have to give class name, then name of the object, then we have to specify new keyword, use new keyword, and then we have to call the constructor of that class. Now this bracket represent constructor, you will come to know later also this one also. But now what I can do is if I just comment this one, so all the properties which I declared for that within the class will be available for me to input thing into it. So now what I can do is I can create an object and I can assign name to it, address to it, height to it, width to it, and so on. So all the properties which I can assign some value are being defined into this class. Suppose a new property came for the human. Right now I'm not having any property. If you I will show with that name, like if I make obj dot color, so there is no color property. So what I will do is to make that property here, I will just go here, I will say public string color. Now if I go above here again, now my object will be having one more property named color, suppose white. So this is how we create the object. Now when we are making a class, there are different syntax of defining of properties within the class. Now in this we just we use the raw syntax of defining, you can say, variables. We create a variable for integer, string, float and other thing. So when it comes to the class, there are different guidelines which are used internationally or in the programming language. So for defining a property, what we usually use is we use get and set property to define, like this property is having two methods, get and set. From get you can get the value and set it. So this is the syntax of defining the property. So here also what I did is I just named this class as property with human, and other thing are same. Basically the properties are same. Let me delete this color property which we don't require, so that we can merge and check. Now here I haven't used this get and set, and here I'm using the get and set. But if I just create an object of this class, it will be having the same nature. If I just make use the class name, then I declare the object, and then I use new keyword and call the constructor to create the object. Now same like the this object will be having the properties which I have declared within this class. So if I go here back and I say I want one more property named color, so I will be saying string color get set. And if I go here and I will go for this obj human properties dot, then I can go and specify the color also. So both the class according to the functionality seems similar, but the thing is how we are defining the properties in this class is different. So this is one syntax of defining properties within the class, and this is the second syntax. Now there is one more syntax which is like kind of universally used within the programming language, and later you will understand like why this syntax is used while our program will go, like our lecture will go. Now here what we do is for each property we define one private member also. Private member means this member will not be accessible outside the class. So here you see like we have two variable name. One is name with capital N and second is with lowercase name, okay, n. So what we can try is we let me uncomment this class. This class name is property, it is proper human class, okay. So here if I go and use this object, and if I try to use lowercase n, it is not there because this member is private, so this is not accessible to outside world. It can be accessed within the class. Later also you will be understanding when I will come to the topic of access specifier. Now here what we do is, this is the like universal syntax of using properties within the class. So what we do is we define a private member of the same property. The name why we kept the same is because we don't want to get confused what is the name of private member. And here what we do is when this property is called, we use this get and set method to set the values. So the values I'm setting in the private variable, I'm not setting within the public variable like a public property. Now for the next one, the age also, I have one private member, that is age with like lowercase, and second we have age with capital A, like the uppercase A. And here what we are doing is when we want to get the value, we are returning value of age with the lowercase, and when we have to set the value, then we will be using age equal to value. So and this age is the lowercase means the private member. So let us see when and how these things are called. So let me get a breakpoint here, let me add this breakpoint here, and if I just run my program, oh sorry, let me put a breakpoint beneath where we are doing this task, okay. Now let me call this, when I am declaring the object, neither get is called, neither set is called. Now when I move next, now I am setting age, width and name. Now when I'm setting the name, here I have put the breakpoint. So you see value is having this value, and right now this name is null, but when I hit F10, now this private member is assigned a value. Why this is made is like there should be no direct contact of outside world with the private member, so that's why we made properties having the similar name and which are inputting the values through them to the private members. So this is the, you can say, universal syntax, like accepted syntax. So whenever you will be working on like classes, try to use this syntax. If you don't want to use, you can use these syntax also, so these will be working as well. So if you see, the nature of the class will be remain the same when these three things we are using all three syntax. Now why the syntax like response is same, now why do we have a different syntax? The reason is, if you want to do some task while setting up some value, suppose you have a logic like you want to you don't want to allow the person to input any age between like a less than 18 or something, so you can check here, so you can do different functionality here, even you can write lines here, console.write lines. So this is while setting, if you want to do some tasks, that how you can do it. So like later you will understand, it's more you can say more things which you can do with this one, but these all three syntax work like the same. Okay, now what we did is we declared made three classes. One is human with a base syntax, that is this one, directly using the variables, and then we have one more class, properties with human. Here what we did is, instead of giving directly, we named given them as a properties, we declared them as a properties. And in the third one, what we did is we created one private member representing the public member of the property, and instead of setting or getting the direct value within the variable, this public member will be setting value to these private members. And this is for all the properties. Okay, for width also there is a private member, for height also there is a private member. Now coming to the next one. Now now in oops we have methods, events, and the other thing which we can have in a class. So methods, you can say as a process, you can name them as a process. Now what we have is, we have a human class and we are declaring some properties, and later we want to have some method which should return all the things back to the user or do any kind of process. So in those cases we make methods or events, something like that, and these methods do represent do some task. Okay, you can process the data within these methods. So if you will go, let us go into this class. In this class all the properties are the same as like the above class, but there is one method named getDetails. Now in getDetails, what I am doing is I am writing all the details. Now this now one thing I want to tell is, here I am using this keyword and this.Name. So this represent current instance of the object. Like if you have made three object of this class, then this will represent the current object or whatever you are processing. So what I am saying, without this also you can use, so it will not be a different case. Now here what I can I made is, I have made a this getDetails, and what it will do, it will write details whatever we have inputted in these objects to the console. So let us see what it does. Let us make one breakpoint. So right now if we go to our console, this is empty, and here values are there within my object. And if I go F10, if I press F10, now all the details which I am having in my object are printed over the console. So in method, one thing is clear, we can process the data, whatever we have a business logic or whatever we want to do with our data, we can have it in the class. So class can have properties as well as it can have methods. So let's come to the static properties. Now in the class we have one more thing, like we can declare properties as static. Now static properties come into play when we have to share some data with all the instance of the class. Now here what we are doing is, let me tell you, let me read out the definition. When a property is declared includes a static modifier, the property is said to be static property, and static property is not associated with a specific instance. So I think let me show you the practical, that will make more sense. Now here what we did is, we made one class named ID generator. Now if you see above classes, if I go with the if I try to access properties directly with the class without declaring an object, and if I go here, so I won't be able to access the properties. So for accessing any property, I need to create a new object of a class. Now why this happens is because class is never comes into the memory. When you create an object, then a copy of class is given a memory where you can set and like retrieve the data and do the processing. But till the time you don't create an object, this class will never come to the memory. Okay, now what static member do? Now in static member, these members are being called and initialized when the class is made, when the compilation of class is done. Now later we have this like all the static member will be there throughout the program. We can change the value, do anything, but they will be shared among all the instances. Now what that means is, now in this class what I made is I made one property named id with lowercase I having integer value, and it is static type. And I made one more the property which is public property of this private property. What it will do is, whenever we are calling the get method, we are incrementing what is the value in the id variable and then returning the id, and also initially we are setting up the value. So here we will call the set, here we will be setting the value, and then we will be returning the id incremented. So in this case, suppose I have this what I am doing. And also one more thing, for static object you don't need to create any you can say object of the class, you can access them directly. So without creating an object, I can access this static member which is available there. So what I will do is I will run my program. So as I told you, okay, let me make one breakpoint here also, how the get will work. Now when I am calling this get, it will go here, then I'm incrementing the value and returning the incremented value. So if I go here and see what is the value here, the value is 1. Now in the next case, as I told you, we will be sharing the same instance. So now next time, without creating an object, when I'm calling it again, now id value will be incremented to 2. So static value static member remain in the memory till the execution of the program is not ended. Okay, so static member is required when I have to share some values among all the instances. So I can declare them static. So every time when I'm calling, here it was 1, here it was 2, here it was 3. So the value is incrementing and values still reside. If I go again, and if I just go here, now the value will be 4. Now anytime, like when I'm focusing on it, I'm retrieving the value. Every time when I'm retrieving the values, it is incrementing this id, if you see. So these are the static members. Okay, now why I showed you this static member, because I just want to explain you some concept of constructor and access modifier. Now basically we have 3 basic access modifier: private, protected, and public. But in new C like in the C# we have few more, like internal, protected, and other and internal also. But these are the 3 main access specifier which are used. Now private access specifier is access is limited to the containing type. As I showed you, the private id which we declare is not this id with lowercase I is not available outside the class. We are available with this other id with the uppercase only outside the class. So we can call this id and access it value through this public property. So now protected is access is limited to the containing class or types derived from the containing. Basically protected we will not be covering today, we will be covering it in the when we will cover inheritance, so leave it for now. And public is access is not restricted, it can be accessed anywhere. Now coming to the constructor. Now constructor, basically every class has a default constructor which is not parameterized, but we can override it with a parameterized construction. Now what is constructor? A constructor is invoked when you use new operator. By default there is default constructor. Now constructor can be parameterized. So why constructor is required? If there is a logic of your class, like whenever and you can say whenever an object of my class is created, you want to do some certain action, you want to do something. So in those cases what you have to do is you have to make a constructor. So every time whenever and this object will be created, it will be that's why I told you, like here we say new given and then we call the constructor. So whenever we call the constructor, it will do some task if we want, otherwise we can leave it blank also. So now here what I did is, as I told you, we have this id generator. Every time we will get the value, we will get an incremented value. So here what I did is I created an employee class. Now employee can have employee id, name, address, department, and also I have made it this method which will be returning me the emp id. Why I made like this is I don't want anyone to set the employee id, so I made it private. and I haven't created any public property to represent this employee ID, which through which it can be accessed from outside world. So what I will do is, whenever my employee ID instance is created, I will be generating a new ID and assigning to this employee ID. And if I want to retrieve the employee ID, I will be using this employee ID method. So there is no direct setting up the employee ID. Whenever my instance will be created, a new ID will be assigned. So let me show you how it is how does it work. Let me uncomment these two. Here what I did is I just created two objects of like employee m1 and m2, and I assigned some values. So whenever I am let me have constructor like in break mode here. Whenever I am calling like when I am initializing my object with the constructor, it will go to the constructor first. So when I'm going to toward the constructor, it call the new value, and employee ID 4 is been assigned to this employee ID. Why 4? Because 3 times this ID is like ID generator is called. So that's why we are the values incremented, so new values assigned. So my 3 values are done. Now through this method only I will be getting this employee ID. So now my employee ID assigned is 4. Now for the employee ID, next whenever when I am creating the instance, now you see when I am creating the instance, it is again calling the constructor. Now again the value is incremented and employee ID is generated, new employee ID is generated. I can assign the values and I can do my task. So this is how this access modifier works. I can have a private object which I don't want to share directly. Here I am not sharing it directly. I am setting up the value in the constructor, and I am returning the value whenever it is required from the method. So this is what access modifier is. You can hide anything, like make anything private and public, so that it can be accessed, like you can control their access. So this was not achievable in C language or any procedural language. So this is what we did. Now few more example, like as I told you, constructor can be parameterized. So here I have created one more class named employee details. Here what I will do is, whenever I will be creating an object, I will be passing one parameter to the constructor. Now how you declare the one thing I forgot to tell you is, to declare the construction there is no special thing. What you have to do is you have to specify the public or private. If you specify it private, then no one can create any instance of this class, and the constructor name will be the same, and constructor is always not return like non-return, like it never returns any value. So here I am making the constructor and doing my task. So when it comes to the parameterized constructor, what I do is I will specify the parameter. Now I have one public constructor which is only accepting one parameter. Now in this, whatever parameter I will be specifying, according to that parameter I will be assigning salary to the employee. Now what I made is, I don't want salary to be public, like directly editable. So what I made is, I made private object of salary as well as employee ID, which can be accessed by get employee ID, employee ID method, and also I made the salary which is private, and I just want to return the salary like according to the class passed, what is the salary of that employee. So here what I will do is, when I am calling my like creating an object, I will be passing. Now if I try to create object without passing any value, what it will do? It will give exception, because there is no constructor without any value. Basically we have one constructor which is accepting a parameter. So I will be passing my parameter. So what I am doing is, I am passing A as a parameter, means my employee class is A. So whenever my object is called, it will hit into the constructor. Now what constructor is doing? First it will be accepting the parameter. Second, my employee ID is generated, new employee ID. Now according to the employee class I will be assigning salary, and so on. Now here, to get employee ID, I have this employee ID method. I am returning the employee ID, and now if you see, employee ID is 6, and when I am calling my get salary method, I am returned with the salary whatever according to the constructor we got. So for the second object also we are doing the same. If we go here, we have new employee ID, that is 7, and for the salary also it is returning the private member of salary, and I am getting the salary. So for the beginners, like as I told you, like it is not much you should focus first. What you have to do is you have to understand what are the access specifier, like how private and public works, what are the constructor, and how properties is defined. Suppose like tomorrow you have one more example, like if you want to create a class of a car. Now you have, you know, what are the properties of car, like a car has like number of seats, its mileage, its speed, top speed, like its height, width, and length. So there are different features. When you are coming with a bike, then you have like what is RPM for that bike and all. So these are the things you just have to imagine what in real world things are there, like for which I'm creating the class. Like suppose you want to make a class of a tree. Now tree is having type, like whether it is like a different type of tree, like it's a herb or different, and what is the average height of the tree, what is the color of its leaves and other things. So you can create class of anything, just you have to notice what are the properties that object is having in the real world. Okay, now if you want to make an class of an apartment, now apartment has number of rooms, kitchen is there or not, washroom is there or not, number of bedrooms, number of dining room, and the other different things are there. So whenever you are making an like class for any real world object, you just have to analyze what are the real world properties of that class, and then you can map those property to the class. I hope I have made like easy for you to understand classes. If still you have any question, you can contact me through my email ID, my phone number, and my website, and my Skype ID also.